Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy Walsh. I'm the creative director and CEO here at Soulbound Studios, working on the new multiplayer evolving online world, or MEOW as we call it, Chronicles of Elyria. I'm joined today by my colleague. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Adam Maxwell, lead designer on Chronicles of Elyria.
So Adam, Snipe Hunter, if you're on our Discord or in our forums, Snipe Hunter and I, also known as Caspian, are doing another live Q&A today. As you can tell, these are not scripted. We're not reading from a teleprompter. And I've just had way too much coffee today. But today we are going ahead and doing our Q&A, a live Q&A, which is focusing on a recent design journal or write-up that we did. It was the release 040 adventure intro thread that we did. And so as part of our development process, anytime we do a new release and we talk about the features that we're going to be working on and the things that we're going to be working on over that release, we open it up to our community to ask us questions about the things that we're going to be working on, because we feel like it gives us a good opportunity to maintain a synergistic relationship. So Snipe and I will be answering questions. The format is that players and community members go onto our forums. There's a thread where they're allowed to ask questions one at a time, up to 3 questions. We ask them to keep them brief because we do read those questions out loud as part of the Q&A process, and then we will do our best to answer them live. One of the things that's fun for us is that we don't tend to read them in advance, because there's a certain amount of excitement that comes from reading over a question and going, huh, that's interesting. So while we do curate them just before the Q&A and making sure that they're thematically related, we go ahead and group them and stuff like that. And we do eliminate ones that were voted poorly, or that we feel like maybe don't address the topics that we're currently looking at the most. We don't prepare for these really beyond just a few minutes beforehand. So we were actually just reading over some of these questions before the live stream, and it's going to be fun. Today will be an exciting day. Couple things to note. We did in the 040 write-up let people know that we are working on a new event coming up called the Searing Plague. It's a community event. We plan on doing community events every July and then like January, just as part of our community outreach schedule. We do have one that we're working on right now. It was announced as part of the 040, but because we've got a lot of information coming up about it fairly soon, there's going to be a forum channel or a Discord channel, forum, I think, on the forums, and it's going to be a big focus for like 6 weeks. We're not going to really address any questions about the Searing Plague today. I feel like once that information drops and players have more than just an overview describing what the game is like, that questions would be far more targeted and far more relevant. So while we did get questions in the thread about the Searing Plague event, we're not going to address questions today. So with that being said, most of the focus of 040 was talking about the fact that we're going to be touching a broad range of systems and really every feature area for the Alpha 1 in 040, and then iterating on those again in 050, where we add more depth to them and a little bit more. So really, it's an open-ended set of Q&A questions. We got a lot of questions about the skill systems that we talked about, because we did show our skill flower, at least where it was at the beginning of 040 or just shortly after 040 began.
I regret calling it a skill flower.
Skill flower. I mean, that's what it looks like. But it's obviously undergone iteration since then. Part of 040 is about iterating on that skill system and making sure that the exit of 040 is us feeling very confident about the set of skills we have, the techniques and things you can do within those skills, things that require player skill, ones that require just character skill or knowledge. And so it's not finalized yet. It's still a work in progress. That is the whole point of the intro, is to let you know that this is stuff we're working on now, not stuff that is done. So that being said, there is a lot of questions about skills, but as Snipe and I recognized when we were looking over the list of questions, if we were to focus on just answering people's skill questions, that would be the entire hour plus. Literally, yeah. Like 2 hours maybe. So there are some other questions that people had around more general topics, and we're gonna take a stab at those first, and then take the time we have remaining to address the high level skill questions that people have. So let's get started. I'm zooming in on Twitch. So you guys know, Snipe and I do have a view of the Twitch chat. I'll be glancing down periodically, as well as he, I'm sure, to see what the comments are. We'll do our best to try and address them as we can. However, we need to make sure we get through the questions that we've got, so we probably won't take a ton of time to address things that are going on inside of the Twitch chat. But the great thing about Twitch is we can always read over the questions later, the comments and stuff like that. Right. And so that gives us an opportunity to see what you guys are talking about inside the Twitch. So we do enjoy going back and reading over them after the fact. So hello to everybody for joining us, and let's get started.
Yeah.
All right, the first set of questions we actually had today were on game engine and gameplay. So this is not the skill system. The first question we got was a highly rated question from Shikayo. It says, since you guys have mentioned moving away from Spatial OS, I haven't heard anything on how you intend to address the server infrastructure. In particular, handling a large amount of players on a server. A lot of games use channels or instances. For COE, could you have each duchy or so be its own instance? All adjacent instances share location data and lead in the background to make a seamless instance hop when moving through the world. There are ways to handle this that have been explored in games in the past that have the same population issues to deal with. Simply, how do you intend to handle a large number of players on each server? That's a great question. As people may or may not know, last year we moved off of using Spatial OS, which was the system we were planning to use for our backend initially. We did that for a few different reasons, but since then we have been working on our own platform. And ultimately, the platform we're working on uses a set of well-known, well-established technologies in the kind of a web API, distributed system space, microservices and things like that. So it's a similar set of technologies, just rather than having one solution like Spatial OS, we're using several different things. So for example, we still use things like Docker as a system for creating containerized microservices. So we've got that. We still have load balancers that allow us to distribute requests and messages that come in from the clients across a wide number of servers. And so our ability to scale out horizontally is still the same as it was with Spatial OS. It's just required us to kind of duct taping intelligently together a lot of different microservice technologies and architecture. So the short answer for you is, we're actually planning to do it the exact same way we were before. We still have a backend entity system that keeps track of the state of the world really everywhere. It is distributed across these services that are transparent to the users. So you will move around in an open world, going indoors, outdoors, going from outside into a cave, and you'll do that seamlessly. So you'll never have, aside from when you enter the astral plane, which does require a loading screen due to an asset swap and some other things. Aside from when you go back and forth between the astral plane, we don't really anticipate that you're going to see any loading screens or anything like that. As far as you guys know, it's all being handled by a single large server that's capable of running hundreds of thousands of players at the same time, when the reality is it's actually distributed across hundreds or thousands of machines that are each running microservices, some related to physics processing, some related to AI processing, some are fielding requests for what's in people's inventory, others are fielding requests for distributing chat messages. Each of these microservices have their own specific role that they're responsible for, and we have the ability to load balance those services individually so that we make sure that, for example, if one service starts to get overloaded, that it doesn't have an impact on the other services. So hopefully that gives you a little idea. I guess the important takeaway here is that we do have people on the team who have past experience, myself included, working on large scalable systems, and we feel quite confident with where we are in the process. All right, the next question is from Protagonist, and this is not an all antagonistic question. So question is for 040 and 050, what sort of state will the story engine be in? Will there be random events popping up? Dependent also, I guess, on the state of NPC AI. That's actually a great question. One of the big focuses of 040 is the story engine. So we talked a little bit about the personal destiny system recently. You guys have been given more insight into what we're doing with that. But I think, in particular, many people on the team are very excited about the story engine and the work that we're going to be doing in 040 on that.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah, I think that I think of all the things that we're working on, really every system in Chronicles of Elyria is somehow integrated in with the procedural and dynamic story engine. So having the ability to move around in a settlement and having the NPCs having things that they need from you that are tied together in an integrated story, or having a reason for you to go and consume content, like delving into an old ruins or into a Harathi mine that's been abandoned, something like that. That's really what the game is about.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
I actually kind of wish you guys could see our whiteboard with our integration map, because it's like all of the feature areas of the game with arrows leading to the things they integrate with, and ultimately they all end.
There's just like one bar that's just like
bar that is story engine.
Yeah,
right. It's basically the keystone to everything we're doing, and so it's massively important for us, and I'm super excited to start working on it.
So yeah, it's a big focus. I think both 040 and 050 will be heavily focused on the story engine. Nagash asks, as 040 is for integrating past prototypes developed over the past couple of years, does this mean we will soon see the old PAX demos, such as the jousting demo, make a reappearance? Also, would it be possible to make these available to the community so we can play as standalone demos, or would you just be integrating the code into the game? Great question. So, we have a lot of prototypes that we did, both client-side and server-side. So, for example, the first time we went to PAX, we did a combat demo. And this was multiplayer, but it was using Unreal's built-in networking system. It was just the Unreal Engine. But it gave us an opportunity to experiment with combat, parrying, and deflecting, and there was an environment that we built for that that was actually part of the Silver Run mine. And that was a lot of great fun. But then we kind of put it aside. We rolled out another combat version for our next major demo, which we did, I think, at PAX East the following year, which was for our that was the parkour demo and things like that, which was also incidentally in the Silver Run mine. And those are things that were heavily focused on client-side stuff. So there wasn't as much back-end, but there was a lot of like movement and making sure the animations were smooth and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff has been integrated in already. But there were other things, if you've checked our YouTube channel, things like our aging and body dynamic system, which we wanted to validate from a technology standpoint, that we could actually age a body and that we could make it look older gradually, or that we could cause it to have different animation sets. But that was stuff that we never really capitalized on because we didn't need them for the ability to do the things that we were working on at the time. But now we're kind of getting to that point again where it's like, okay, now we're pulling all these features in together, and we want to make sure that the client side and the server side both really have all the functionality in one place. So it's unlikely that we'll be bringing back those old demos for a couple of reasons. Number one, that we don't really get any value from bringing them back. A lot of them have older versions of our animations, older versions of our rigs that we've iterated on since then, and so they're really just not compatible with the state of the game right now. But also, we brought those to PAX in a controlled environment where we had the binaries. They're not protected. They weren't set up to be used in a client-server situation with authentication or any kind of authorization systems. And so they're just generally not secure. And so it takes time and overhead to get an application like that shippable to the point where you could put it in the hands of players and feel relatively comfortable that it's safe and that you're at less risk of like reverse engineering and other things. And we just don't want to spend the time making those demos shippable. So yeah, it's unlikely you guys are going to see those. However, take comfort in knowing that the systems that we worked on in those and the things that people got a chance to experience are making their way into the final game. So, all right, that is that for that.
Oh yeah, now we're on to equipment, items, and combat.
I'm done talking for now.
Okay, so RegLeb asks, is any item throwable, and will different items deal different amounts of damage? So any item that you can pick up is throwable, and what you can pick up is in part determined by your character's strength and things like that. However, you can't throw everything. You can't pick up a house. Like, it's not a superhero game. But the things that you throw will have different amounts of damage that they deal based on how you threw them, like how hard you threw them, how fast they were going, how heavy they are. So yeah, pick up a rock and throw it. It's going to be better than picking up a feather and throwing it. I don't know that you can actually do that, actually. But...
No. There was a question, too, people had asked before as a follow-up, one-handed versus two-handed. Some things you can pick up, like a lamp or something like that, you can pick up with one hand, where there are other things that, due to the weight or volume or shape, require two hands. Can you pick those up and throw those?
Technically, yes, but you're not going to be able to throw something that heavy very far. Like, right. It's based on your character, really. So, a Yoru could pick up a cow and hug it, I guess.
But can I pick up a Kipik?
So we've talked about that.
Yeah. It is a reoccurring subject, not only because we're interested in like player interactions, like shared emotes, but also the community never lets us forget that there is this strong desire for Kipik tossing.
They are evidently tossable if you look at them. I mean,
it's true. All right. Looks like we got a question on tribes from Luminios. You want to read that one?
Yeah. Can we expect to see at least provisional stat ranges for the tribes before we go into map selection? It would be really helpful to be able to compare the tribes not only in relation to the Naren, but to each other as well. Since 030 already included character sheets to look at, I assume there already are some more solid descriptions possible than the ones that we got a year ago. So, your assumptions are correct. That said, I don't think we're going to give you that kind of information before map selection. They feel unrelated to me, and at the same time, we're not really a stats-heavy game. We're not really a game that's about to use the vernacular, grognarding your stats or min-maxing your characters. That's not really the kind of game that we're building, and so we're probably not going to focus on releasing those kinds of numbers. Certainly not anytime soon.
Right. I'm just looking at the Twitch channel, and we are not centered in frame. We are centered on the background.
And there's a bookshelf over
there's
there.
a bookshelf. Our bookshelf is very visible.
Yeah, which is unusual. It's not normally so visible.
I don't know whether or not I should scoot over and let you scoot over a little bit, or whether or not we should shift the camera back over, but...
it is a little weird.
Yeah. I think we're getting signs that we're going to move the camera to the right a little bit.
Tilt time.
There you go. That's probably good. All right. I think the intention was for us to be more centered on this part of the room, but maybe we didn't adjust the table and stuff. There we go. Look at that. Now it's perfect.
Yep. Awesome.
There we go. Okay. I was in the middle of saying something. I got totally distracted. That's fine. It shows off our apple juice collection. Anyways, okay. Let's talk about the next topic. The next topic is on medicine. People are just going crazy. Well done, sir. Good job for adjusting the camera. Actually, you know what? It's harder than you think.
It is, actually.
All right. Leva asks, how important a part will surgery and pharmacology be in terms of actually saving someone's spark? Will one of them or both just work as a buff, removing buffs or removing debuffs, or can it stop someone from permadeath or even bring someone back from a coup de grace? What are your thoughts on that?
I would argue all of the above. We were sort of joking about it before the stream started, but like, a bad surgery could cause a coup de grace too.
Right. I look good on today's stream.
You do, man.
I'm just going to say that.
I feel a little underdressed, though I am rocking my cool Transformer shirt.
You are rocking your Transformer shirt. The one feedback I noticed Twitch has is make sure when putting your hands down that you put them to your sides and not in front of you. Just pointing that out. All right. Hajime Saito says, will health and healing, medicine, surgery... By the way, there's been a lot of questions on pharmacology and health and stuff in this one. One of them in particular by Hajime is interesting.
To say the least.
To say the least. There are like 3 questions here that are all similarly related. And I'm going to ask all the questions at once. And then I'm going to let Snipe summarize the answer, because I think it can be summed up much faster than we can address them individually. So here are the 3 questions for your entertainment. Number 1. Will health and healing, medicine, surgery, pharmacology, illnesses and or genetics take different organ systems into consideration? I.e., can you have an illness specific to the heart, lungs, or brain, etc., requiring a specific treatment that won't work on other illnesses and suffer specific symptoms and limitations, even just temporarily? Associated with dysfunction of that particular organ, e.g. shortness of breath due to lung disease, pneumonia, or asthma, limit aerobic activity like running, eye conditions that limits the ability to recognize people or aim a weapon, lactose intolerance means no one wants to stand next to you because, well, you get it. So that was the first question. So that one's focused on illnesses as they pertain to individual organs. Next question, which has 3 parts to it. Will it be possible to create poisons, antidotes, and treatments which specifically target particular organ systems to produce specific effects and or illnesses? B. Will there be different levels of severity for illnesses, diseases, and poisonings requiring varying amounts of qualities, durations, and or combination of treatments for full recovery? Part C. If there is a different level of severity, will there also be varying degrees of effects on other organ systems, such as illustrated? And there's a diagram.
That is a killer thread, though.
Yeah, and then the third one, this one crosses pages, says, will the pharmacology of treatments and poisons take into consideration a simplified version of pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics? After all, that's what pharmacology is all about. Simply put, pharmacokinetics. Can the same drug be given in different ways, such as on the skin for a local effect to the applied area, or orally for a systemic effect, such as that different methods of administration and production produce different varying degrees of effectiveness and side effects, eliminating half-life effects, onset of effects, and other things like that? Pharmacodynamics, different receptor types have different effects on one organ system, and the same receptor can be found at different locations to produce different effects and side effects. Example, activation of beta receptors in the lungs open airways, in the heart speeds up heart rate and force of contraction, in the eyes potentially worsens glaucoma. Inhibition of beta receptors has the exact opposite effect, and theoretically, but with limited poor quality evidence, delays premature labor. Inhibition of cholinergic receptor, I can't pronounce that. Cholinergic receptors. Heart speeds up the heart rate. Lungs opens up the airways. Dries up mucus and sweat secretions. In the eyes, it dries up the eyes, worsens glaucoma, causes blurred vision. In the brain, it causes sedation and drowsiness. Also causes delirium, hallucinations, dementia. In the intestines, can cause constipation. As you can see, 2 different receptors can be located in the same organ and cause similar effects while causing opposite effects in other organs. So, I wanted to put all that out there to demonstrate the depth at which Hajime Saito is looking at these systems. So I'm gonna hand this over to you.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on these questions?
Well, first of all, I feel like I've leveled up my pharmacology skills just by listening.
Skilled up.
But to answer the core question, which is kind of, broadly, how detailed is the pharmacology system going to be? The answer is not precisely that detailed. We're not tracking the state of your brain, the state of your heart, the state of your lungs. That said, the effect of these organ-specific toxins or diseases or other infections, we absolutely are simulating. This is kind of a piece of the verisimilitude is greater than veracity sort of motto that we have. It would be, awesome if we had the computing resources to be able to simulate every cell in the human body and just run with it. That would be great. I would love to do that. Realistically, though, that's not possible. But capturing the effect that these systems have on a character is something that we can absolutely do with a little bit of abstraction. So, no, we're not gonna track the state of your lungs, but we are absolutely going to have diseases and toxins that can rob you of your fatigue, of your energy rather, so that you lose your breath more quickly. We are absolutely going to have poisons and diseases that can cause things like hallucinations or cause you to be delirious. These are all actually going to happen, and you will even say that they're diseases and afflictions of the brain and the lung, but the reality is that there isn't a brain or a lung actually being affected. That's beyond the pale for us.
Yeah, there's always this trade-off with respect to simulations as to have the accuracy of the simulation versus the degree of simulation for the purpose of entertainment. And we are a game first, and so we need to make sure that the simulation always approximates the ideal while being as simple in concept as possible, so that we can focus on the entertainment value and not on the realism. So to Snipe's point, the effects of those things will be there. It will be as if if you can or can't tell whether or not we're actually affecting different organs, then we're doing something wrong. But the entertainment value should still be there.
Absolutely.
They're kind of going crazy. They were observing the fact that the wrecking ball mug was visible. So I took it a step further and I went ahead and I shifted it so that they could see it. I don't know why people did this, but there was a wrecking ball video of me at one point in time that had me as the wrecking ball animation. So since I have it here, I'll just go ahead and desensitize you, because once you've seen it, you'll never actually be able to unsee it. So there you go. Blame a community member, not me. I had nothing to do with this.
It is a really well done Photoshop.
It is really well done in Photoshop, and I have never looked better. I was at my fittest during that shooting. All right. Next section is on, I think we're moving on to upcoming features.
Yep.
So, Protagonist again asks, with map voting, will all maps be able to receive votes for each server? Could we get into a situation where a single map receives the most votes for 2 or more server? This would be a good case for hiding the voting than having internal logic that says if the same map is voted top for 2 or more servers, take the total votes as a tiebreaker and other server gets its second most votes. Otherwise, you may have folks wishing they had said map F as a choice for their server. So, great questions. We haven't released all the details yet on map voting, but basically there are 2 rounds to it. The first round is only going to be on the non-oceanic servers. So NA West, NA East, and EU all participate in round 1. OCE isn't in round 1, they're only in round 2. In round 1, there's going to be about 20 different maps that we've generated that we give you guys as a single pool, and then each of the different servers get to vote towards the top 5 servers or the top 5 maps that they want. We considered giving each server their own set of 5 and just calling it good, but we felt like some servers might want strongly a map that was only provided to the other servers, and we didn't want there to be any kind of contention where NA East says we really wanted, our whole server really wanted the map that NA West was given, and so we're letting the players help decide which map they have on their server. That being said, we really don't want the same map being present on more than one server. It causes a lot of problems with discovery and exploration. It causes problems with our story and discovery of key world events and locations and things like that. And we don't really want to create a technology race between the two of them or any kind of discovery race. So all of them have to have a different version of the map. So what we're doing in round 1 is we'll have 20 different maps, and the servers will be voting for their top 5. And the reason why we're going ahead and revealing those maps in round 1 is because if you as a server see that a map is being heavily voted on by another server to the point where it's unlikely that it would end up in your top 5, people can choose to, if they want to, not spend any votes on that in order to make sure they get a good set of 5 that they can make a decision on for their server. It can also be used to go the other way. You can see that a server is really pushing for that, and it's in their top 5, and you feel like you can push higher to make it like also in your top 5, but maybe higher than it was on the other server, in which case then you could potentially take that and put it on your server instead. Really, at the end of the day, our goal is making sure that we get as many satisfied players as possible, because that's what we want. We want satisfied players. And so this system allows for the highest likelihood of the maps that people want on different servers showing up on the server that they would like as a vote, in the pool. That being said, once round 1 ends, every server will have a set of 5 maps that they're then voting on, and then that vote is hidden. So you as a server will be voting on the maps that you want for your server, and we won't reveal which one people choose until the results are final. So there you go. So it's kind of a best of both worlds. We have good reasons. We considered doing it hidden, but ultimately we didn't feel like having it hidden would really do anything, because people could spend all their votes on voting for the top 5 servers and then find out at the end of the day they got none of those as part of the pool, because those happen to be the exact same 5 servers that another server wanted, and they just threw more votes at them. And so this way, it guarantees that when you guys enter round 2, you have at least a couple of maps that your server really wanted that no other server did.
Before we go answering another question, I want to backtrack because I was paying attention to chat here. Adrian06 pointed out that we didn't answer the question of whether the same drug can be applied in different ways to get different effects. And the answer is no, yes. So the ingredients, the components that make up your formulations are absolutely applicable in different ways. But the resulting thing that you get out of formulating will be a particular application of that drug. So there will be, a topical salve version and potentially a thing that you could mix into a drink version of the same sort of drug, but they're going to be 2 separate crafting recipes. They're not going to be the same object that you just apply 2 different ways.
Right. So, you could have an ingredient, because what we do is we have resources, natural resources, renewable as well as non-renewable resources, which they can get processed into materials. And these materials are used for crafting. So you could find an herb or something, grind it up into a powder. That powder can then be used in a number of different recipes to, as you said, create a tincture or a salve or something like that. That recipe will dictate the effects. So it's possible that given a recipe, let's say 2 different recipes, that it will result in 2 different effects using the same set of ingredients but prepared differently.
Right.
And actually that's a big part of the crafting process in general, is knowing how to prepare these, especially I think the cooking disciplines like alchemy and things like that. But also, in many cases, you can take that recipe that you have and just modifying an ingredient could result in a different recipe if you have the recipe for that or the knowledge. And that's also really cool because, even subtle changes in preparation or in the ingredients that you use is a different recipe for us. So,
yep. So apologies for missing that the first time around.
But thank you for catching it. Zero Cool asked, is the upgrade to allow forum persona penned for release 050? I don't have the schedule on me, but here's what I can tell you. The 040, 050, 060s, etc. are all of the development milestones for the game itself. And then the outreach and community team actually has their own schedule that we lay over top of that. It's focused on individual months. So we have months where we do some types of events, like the community event we have in July. There is the raising awareness for a nonprofit and supporting a nonprofit in August. There is things like our Kickstarter versaries in May. Then we add into that time and energy for development work, like map voting, personas, any kind of stuff like that. And that's completely different calendars. So it could be that it is happening or development is being done on personas around the same time as 050, but it could also be, done a little bit in 040. It could be done in 060. Right. They're completely different timelines with respect to the development. That being said, we have a couple of things coming up. We have map voting coming up. Then we have domain and settlement selection as well. We've got the EP store. and then I think we have personas somewhere a little bit after that. So I think it's unlikely that we'll be doing much work on the persona system in 040 or 050. I think more likely it's going to end up somewhere around 060 or maybe later. I don't know. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Next page. We're almost getting to double back to the skill stuff.
Yep.
Protagonist says, how's the parkour system coming along? There are hurdles.
I like that.
See what I did there? No, we actually haven't actually worked much on the parkour system lately. The parkour system is heavily client side. From a server side standpoint, you have an object's position. It's moving around in the world due to the physics system, velocity, and things like that. And then there are certain contextual movements that are allowed depending upon whether or not you're up against a wall, whether you're moving over any kind of a hurdle or something like that. And then ultimately that just changes your character's animation states and does things like that, which are mostly manifested on the client. And we've been mostly focusing on mechanics right now on the server side, core fundamental gameplay mechanics. But as we move back into 040 and probably more in 050, I think, because 040 is a lot more still of the gameplay mechanics and being integrated into this client server, but I think the client focus is going to be more heavily in 050. We will be getting that stuff again. And I think last we talked about it, we kind of reviewed the things that we were looking at doing in 040 and 050. Contextual movement was on the list of things that we might want to be working on in 050. So. World and lore. This one's more for you, but Markov asks, as you keep working on biomes, can you tell us what's going to be the next one to get worked on? Subterranean and mountain steppe are the last major ones that come to mind. You know what biomes we're working on next?
Are subterranean and mountaintop really the only two that are left?
We've got boreal forest.
Yeah.
We've done a semi-arid. We haven't done arid desert yet.
Right. Okay. So I thought.
But arid desert technically is the biome of the Eriche, so there may not be an arid desert on the starting continent. We've got more wetland type things. There's still salt marshes. There's still a couple like the xeric shrublands, like shrub steppes and stuff like that.
And there's lots of the other transitional biomes.
There are transitional biomes. There's a ton of transitional biomes. Wetlands, really there's like 4 or 5 major biome types. Forest, desert, wetland, grassland, and tundra. And so there's like, those are like the main 5, but within those, there are variations depending upon latitude and elevation. So there are many different combinations. I think there's like 30 different unique combinations. Many of those are actually going to show up. So I think there's a total of 16 like major biomes and subbiomes that'll be on the starting continent, of which I think we've only officially done 5 of them now, like 5 or 6 of them.
5 or 6, yeah.
So I think we actually still have mostly transitional biomes. Even a wetland, if you look, there are wetlands that occur in various stages as you get closer to the water and further away from like upland wetlands and things like that. So we still got a lot of content to make inside of the different biomes. So there will be no shortage of content there.
Yeah, as for which ones we're working on next, we're still working on the broadleaf forest, and so I don't know that we've decided which one we're.
I would like to work on subterranean, I think.
Me too.
I think the Harathu biome would be a fun one to work on next, and it certainly takes place in the same areas, so that would make sense to me. And there's still some mechanics that we need to work on that only really start to present themselves when working on the subterranean biomes.
Yeah, a really good example of that is the 3-dimensional version of parcels.
Land management system, yeah. When we were originally working on the land management system, we always thought about parcels as a 64 meter by 64 meter rectangle, which works really well unless you have something like a Kipik village where things are vertical as well, because you actually have houses and things like that at various points along the Ironwood. And then there is the Harathi, and they actually are almost, I wouldn't say all inside of caves and tunnels. They're about 50-50 because there are stuff outside on the steppe as well. But what happens? I mean, are you just taking a 64 by 64 square column and going all the way up and down? No, actually we're not. We changed it to be a 64 by 64 by 64 meter cubed environment, but that system is not something we need to explore until we ultimately get into the subterranean environment. So that'll be fun to play with. They want us to do the subterranean stuff next.
I'm in.
All right, sounds good. All right, Mjolnir?
Yep, says, something I'd like to ask is, how do you plan on, this is a good question, how do you plan on spreading the lore through the land? Do you plan on doing it yourself, or do you plan on letting players decide how it's distributed? Finally, if you are spreading lore through the land yourself, in what way are you planning on it being spread if you're willing to tell/have a plan?
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's kind of one of the things that I like about the idea of an evolving world is that it's a collaborative effort how we define the sort of course of events and thus the world history. We are actually doing that backwards too. we've worked with the kingdoms to sort of collate and collect their lore so that when we go to build what I like to call drop-ins, when we go to build the pieces of the world's history that have to exist on every server regardless of the map, we can also incorporate the elements that they have given us when we do so that it can support the histories that they've designed. And that's our plan, is to do that. In fact, without going into too many details, the next community event that we're running, the Searing Plague, is kind of related to this topic.
It's very related to this topic.
Yeah,
I mean, not even a little
I
bit.
just didn't want to give it away. but yeah, so in regards to a more detailed answer, I would say we don't really want to talk about the technological specifics of how we're working this, but we absolutely are incorporating player histories, and both backwards and forwards where we can. And a really good example of that is coming up within days.
Yep. We're always doing things. There are yet more things for the future that we're going to be doing that allow players to help us write the history, both in game, through writing and creating your own player lore and things like that. But really, this period of development we're in right now, which is the production cycle period before we get into exposition. Obviously, exposition is a period of development where we want the players to actually be in the game, and Kingdoms of Elyria as well is a point of time where players are actually in themselves acting out the history of the world prior to the year of launch in the 700s. But we have these community events that we're planning and other things that allow players to actually help us dictate the events indirectly, and just to kind of help us write the history. Because, and I think this is important, a lot of times you get into an MMO and only the designers of the game know the history. So you spend all your time going around reading books and stuff like that in the world to get a sense of the lore of the world. But really, a vast amount of lore and history in a world is shared orally. We pass it from player to player. We tell each other about the lore. And so I think, and it's kind of always been our philosophy, that the best way to train players or to educate players about the history and lore of the world before they got into the world was to allow them to experience it and to allow them to help write it. So when you guys who are actively following the game now, those who are in exposition, you guys have this unique opportunity. You're not going to have to go around and find those books and learn the lore that way. You actually get to be the ones that people go to find out, like, what happened during this event. And you can tell people, oh, I was there during the Searing Plague of the 200s, and it was horrible. There was this and that, and like you can tell people as if you were there, because whether or not you as a player were there or not, or I guess you as a character were there or not, you as a player are.
Right.
You're part of the process. So I would just say, look for more opportunities going forward, as Snipe said. Some starting in the very near future, for you guys to dictate and help us decide what the lore is, so that you don't have to go through the world and discover it. Skills?
Yeah, let's talk about skills.
All right. How are we doing on time? What time is it? We got about a half hour. We're about halfway done.
That's about right. That's kind of what we were hoping for.
That is, yeah.
All right, so Sabacat asks, in a character's lifetime, how reasonable is it to expect sufficient advancement in multiple skill lines? As an example, if I, as an adventurer, wanted to gain survivability skills as well as martial combat skills, will I be hampering my experience with multiple skill progression efforts? Or is the best to stick primarily to one line? So this is actually a question that I don't often see asked directly, but I kind of see people making assumptions one way or another on the forums quite a bit. The answer is you will be able to advance in multiple skill lines. However, there is a sort of, I don't want to say penalty, that's not the right word. There is a cost associated with that. The longer that you go without exercising your skills before you gain a sort of mastery with them, the more likely they are to sort of grow rusty, to sort of atrophy, for lack of a better word. So the further you spread yourself, the less time you're going to be able to spend on each individual skill, which increases the likelihood that one of those skills may atrophy before you actually get back to it. That also depends on your playstyle, though. If you're using these skills every day, they're going to advance, and the other skills that you don't use won't, right? So it's not a cut and dried question. It's not one or the other. The answer is it really depends on how you play the game. You're going to have to find that balance for yourself. That said, we are gearing the game so that you can advance multiple skill lines at once. We're not expecting you to only be a smith and not be able to light a fire or cook a meal. That's not our intention.
Yeah, and to go to play devil's advocate though too. a lot of games out there expect you to become a master of like 5 different skills because they require you to be, you know, a gatherer as well as a crafter as well as this. So, you know, you have to be an expert leather worker and an expert, you know, tanner and an expert this in order for you to gain value out of it. But really the goal of this game is to create an economy. So while, you know, Snipe is absolutely right that, you know, you were gearing the game so that you have an opportunity to advance multiple skills in a single lifetime, we're still also trying to develop the game so that you don't have to feel the need to kind of become a master at everything. And also, you know, you are going to find certain rewards in specializing. You know, as he pointed out, like if you do choose a couple, especially a couple very synergistic skills, and push those only through the activities that you do, then you're going to find that it's easier to develop those. And I think that ties in nicely with the role that you're going to play. You know, if you choose to play a weaponsmith, while we don't have a weaponsmith class or profession, you know, there are skills associated with metalworking, and there are skills associated with like gem cutting and carpentry and things like that. If you find a set of compatible skills that then can help you produce something that's of value to the economy, then I think you're going to find that advancing those shared skills together is very easy. But if you just have an interest in doing, you know, unique things, let's say you have hobbies as opposed to professions in the game, and so you want to be able to do each of these skills to some degree, but they're not really related, they're just things that you find enjoyable. The more of those hobbies you have that aren't compatible, the more difficult you're going to find it to be to maintain those at any high level. But again, it's not really a punishment, it's just kind of a natural process of, you know, having a finite amount of lifetime.
Exactly. There's no rule in the game that says you have to be hyper specialized, but it's more like it's easier to specialize than it is to be a jack of all trades, which is true in real life too. So
right, master of none implies master of none.
Exactly.
Like, you can't become a master of everything if you're a jack of all trades, and that's, I think, true for us too. It will be harder to become a master of everything, but that is a playstyle, and there may be specific roles and organizations in which being a jack of all trades has a unique value. So I guess it's also very situational. You know.
Okay, Troy Defy says, can you expand on how the knowledge of architecture affects the skill of architecture, both for the client and the architect? And for the PC, OPC, and NPC? With enough knowledge, could you bypass the architect, making everyone an architect, or just make the architect a draftsman? No. Okay, so this is
a couple parts there.
Yeah, this is a sort of complex question, but really it's generally about how knowledge works. So let's start there. So I have skills, and these skills are like, using metalworking as an example, my metalworking skill is a measure of how well I understand how to make metal move, how to shape it, how to form it. It's not specifically how to make a blade or how to make a nail or how to make a lock or how to make a trap. Those have their own sets of what we call knowledges, right? So if I wanted to be a trap maker, I'm going to need to know how to make traps. I'm going to have to understand trap construction, and so that comes as a knowledge. Then I can apply the skill of tinkering to actually building the mechanisms for said traps and assembling them. This works the same way in things like medicine, right? So I'm a surgeon, but I don't actually have knowledge of thoracic surgery. So if you want me to take your gallbladder out, I'm really not the guy to ask. I don't even know what it looks like, you know? And that's kind of the role that knowledge plays in the game. It supplies that piece that I've studied this specific thing. Architecture is exactly the same way. So the architecture skill determines how well you can use the architecture tool and how well you can draft blueprints. But the architecture knowledges determine things like, do I know how a buttress works? Do I understand how to build a spiral staircase? Things like that.
Do I understand the load that different types of materials
Right.
will be able to uphold?
And so those knowledges sort of unlock the abilities for you to use different things as you use the architecture tool. This is also true in things like combat. We don't exactly have knowledges in combat. Instead, we have what we call styles, right? But it's the same thing. Styles
It's
are
more muscle.
knowledge.
It's more muscle
Yeah.
memory than knowledge, though.
Right. Styles kind of are the equivalent of knowledge in combat, though. Like, you know, in real life, I might be able to punch really well, but if I've never studied Tai Chi, I'm not going to use Tai Chi. I just don't know how, right? Styles are the same way, right? You have to learn them. You have to gain the knowledge of that style before you can really apply it in combat.
Makes sense. So can you expand on how the knowledge of architecture skill both for the client and the architect and for the PC, with enough knowledge, could you bypass the architect, making everyone an architect, or just making the architect direct?
Right. So more specifically, the knowledge alone isn't enough. If I don't have the skill to use the tools necessary, the knowledge is more like, yeah, I understand how that works, but...
Right. So putting in comparison, you know, let's say I've taken anatomy courses. I understand what the organs do. I know what they look like. I know where they are in the body. I'm still not a surgeon.
Right.
Like there still is training that requires in
Still
order to get the proper
take a
technique.
gallbladder.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
Right.
so you know where my gallbladder's at. Go for it. Like, I mean, those are two ends. So it's like, hey, you're a brain surgeon. Can you take my gallbladder out? Like, again, it might be like, well, okay, you're a capable surgeon. You've got the hand for it. You've got the technique. You don't know where my gallbladder's at. Like that's a problem. But the opposite is also true, which is like you understand how anatomy works, you know where everything is, but you lack the technique to do that.
Right.
And so in order to be successful with the skill system in COE, you need to do both. And knowledge is that part that your character knows. That's the things that you're going to go out and research. That's the things your character is going to learn through experience and through interaction and through communication with other players and NPCs. And then the technique is the player skill part of that. And that's the part that's going to take you guys practicing and you guys developing and unlocking those techniques. And even still, there is some degree of knowledge required by the character to have attained that technique, which still requires you to learn how to do the technique from others, to study it from resources in the game. But your ability to master a technique is more about player skill than it is character skill.
And this actually segs pretty well into the next question. Nanery asks, if I have a skill in animal husbandry, will I be as adept with ursifants as I am with chickens or pigs, or will this skill be broken down further? So this is where knowledge would come in animal handling. A high animal handling skill may make it easier for you to work with an ursifant, but if you don't know anything about ursifants, that's only going to get you so far.
Right.
So you would have to study ursifant behavior and gain that knowledge.
So it's like, I know how to handle an animal. I know the correct way to interact and to not scare animals, but I don't know what an ursifant eats. So can I take care of an ursifant?
Right. So the answer is yes, the skill does get broken down further, but it gets broken down further based on the knowledge that you know. It's not like new sub-skills form out of it or anything like that. That's the role of knowledge, is actually to sort of help these sort of specializations without requiring a million new skills.
They're talking about not knowing where a gallbladder is. We use those for oversimplified examples. All right. Lethality's question.
Is it accurate to say that all skills will have knowledge related to them, but not all knowledge will have related skills? Or maybe more simply, can you go into details on the relationship between the two? So almost every skill that I can think of, actually every skill that I can think of, is going to have some sort of knowledge associated with it.
Or style.
Yeah, assuming style is equivalent to knowledge in its mechanical role. That said, I'm not going to guarantee it either. It really depends on the skills.
Right. I mean, that's the whole point of 040 is locking those things down.
Right.
So most of them do, but there's no commitment to making sure that's true. But I can say the opposite is also true. There is definitely knowledge that is not related to skills.
Absolutely.
Because our knowledge system applies not only use in skills, but also in the gossip system and on the Dance of Dynasties, on the criminal justice system. Your ability to gain knowledge about things is also just useful in the survival system. You try and eat a plant and it causes you to get sick. Now your character knows that you ate that plant and it caused you to get sick.
Not to eat that again.
Don't do that again. So the next time you go to try and pick up that plant, the UI, UX may inform you, like, I recognize this plant as something that made me sick. And so that's, the tools that help you as a player understand what your character knows.
That's a good question, by the way.
That was a good question.
All right. Nanery asks, with scholarship no longer part of the skill flower, how will teaching work? Okay. So teaching is a thing that you can do with any skill that you have. There's potentially a knowledge maybe associated with effective teaching. We haven't really decided that yet. But we decided that there isn't necessarily a specific skill of teaching. It's more about your level of sort of comfort and knowledge with your skill line and the ability of the person that you're teaching to receive that information. So it's more about like attributes, how well you do the teaching. Even that's kind of a question. We're not really sure how interactive it's going to be yet, but
I think the attributes is really the important one. I'm a teacher. Many of the staff here at Soulbound have been teachers. And so we understand that teaching is a craft all on its own. It's not enough to be a subject matter expert. Being a master of your domain does not make you an effective communicator, does not make you an effective teacher. And so we have no illusion that just being good at blacksmithing would make you a good blacksmithing teacher. That being said, we're always trying to balance, what's good for the game. And the way our skill system works right now, you have knowledge, which we've already covered, because if you're teaching somebody blacksmithing, then you already have the knowledge of blacksmithing. Then there is the knowledge of the teaching itself, which becomes a new dimension. But then most of our skills are actually advanced through the use of either techniques or, combat techniques and things like that. That would imply that there has to be techniques associated with teaching itself. And while that's not outside the realm of possibility, really it comes down to, do we want to spend the time on this subject to make specific teaching techniques? Do we want to make people write it down? Do we want to make them have to repeat it? What are the things that we want to do? Ultimately, we found like just integrating the learning process into the mechanics themselves kind of encompasses that teaching thing. Also, as a teacher, there's the age-old debate about whether or not learning is an active or a passive process. How much learning is a result of the teacher versus how much is a result of the students.
Exactly.
And I think what we not what we settled on, but as we move forward in 040, one of the things we're looking at is something a skill? Is something a technique or a process within a skill? Or is something just an attribute? For example, if I'm teaching, there is the mental attributes and the social attributes, such as persuasion and intuition and things like that. So how much is my ability to teach somebody just my persuasion, versus how much of it is their intuition and their ability to learn new things, or their reason as a mental thing. There's also will and reason. So how much is my ability to teach is based on my will and your reason. So there's a lot to do there, and we haven't come to a conclusion yet. But at this point, there isn't, at this exact moment, there isn't a skill with a set of separate techniques associated with teaching.
Right. And this actually kind of just segues right into Nanery's next question, which is, since research is no longer a skill, will all skills have an inherent ability to research innovations?
I don't know that research was ever a skill.
Yeah, I don't know that it was either. But that said, it's always been our intention one way or another that masters of skills can do research in those skills.
In fact, that's one of the ways you have to advance.
Right.
So we, obviously there's still the different skill levels. In the earlier levels, you're experimenting to a degree, you're trying things, you're learning things through books. In the mid levels, you kind of are doing things on your own. You're doing the production of things. You're out there doing combat and things like that. It's just like your usual everyday associate level use. To retain the mastery level of things, you kind of either need to be teaching other people or you need to be doing that research. There's really no other way to advance at the highest tiers into the master and grandmaster levels if you're not either teaching or doing research.
Kipix read.
Kipix read?
There's a comment in the chat.
Nice. Gutsa1 asks, how will engineering, inventing, and other cross-disciplinary professions fit into the skill system?
Oh, okay. So this is actually this is a question that's been asked on the forums a couple of times. So there are a few of you that probably already know the answer. But the answer is that the systems are more about the applications of skills, techniques, more about the applications of techniques, which are grouped under knowledge bases and things that we call skills and knowledge, right? So they're not like metalworking and smithing doesn't mean that's the only thing that you need to know to be a blacksmith, right? You could be just a guy that only moves metal and that's all that you do. But to build a sword, for example, if you wanted to be a swordsmith, you're going to need to be able to assemble your hilt, your guard, your handle, the blade. You're going to need to be able to apply your finishes to the blade. Like, there's all sorts of steps in the process. And these steps in the processes might involve different skills. For example, building your handles, you're probably going to want a leather worker, or maybe you're going to want somebody who works with white metals like silver to do a silver chain wrap. Or you're going to want to learn those skills yourself.
Silversmiths.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the idea is that specializations like that are a combination of the more than one skill plus the knowledge is necessary. So they're not skill lines. They're like professions, basically, is what we call them.
Yep.
And professions are usually involving a collection of one or more skills, or the ability to outsource part of the work to somebody who has those skills.
Yep. All right. Atlas Forgiven asks, will survival skills, and this is actually similar to the previous one, but focusing on a different part of the skill tree. Will survival skills be further broken down into mastery of different biomes, or is it an across-the-board skill? For instance, tracking, hunting, shelter building, and fire making, although similar at its foundation, can be very different depending upon the environment you're in, tundra versus desert. So our skills tend to be active things. These are the things that you're actually going to do. It's the techniques that you would do. So the technique for hunting is going to be similar no matter the biome. Your techniques for fire making, there might be a couple different ones, but in general, once you've mastered those techniques, then you've mastered them. What's really different between the different biomes isn't the techniques and the skills, it's the knowledge of the different biomes. You know, what woods are good at making fire in this biome versus this one? How do I read tracks in this biome versus that one? And so really it's the knowledge of the biome and your mastery over that knowledge that's going to allow you to survive in one biome or another, which means that you can easily take the skills that you've acquired in one biome and then move them over to another, and after acquiring the knowledge to live in that biome effectively, you can do so without having to redevelop those skills.
Exactly. All right, Carowin asks, what skills and skill level will enable research into and treatment of disease? I suspect the medicine skill, along with the skill of pharmacology, would factor into this. That's a fairly good assessment. For example, if a new unknown disease suddenly appears, would doctors with high enough medicine skill be able to research the disease and then research some form of treatment through pharmacology? If a known disease has been researched, would there be a recipe to make the treatment that could then be used by any doctor with the recipe and a high enough level in the pharmacology skill? So yes, you pretty much nailed it. So when a new disease shows up, somebody who understands first aid, somebody who has a decent medicine skill, or somebody who has a pharmacology skill can start to research that cure. Once the cure is discovered, they get a recipe, and that recipe can be used by anybody with the sufficient skill levels and techniques to create it. I know that's a real sort of in a nutshell answer to a very long question, but that's how it works.
I dig it. Simple, precise, and concise. All right, page 2. We have got just a couple more minutes. I don't know how much of page 2 we're going to get through. Like I said, there was a lot of questions on skills, but we also had the other stuff that we wanted to talk to. So let's see if we can get through some of the high-level ones. Huntsmaster asks, we've talked some before about how progression in the skill will be strongly related to what you make, e.g. if a blacksmith wants to make better swords, making loads of nails won't help. With the separation of skills and knowledge in the new skill flower, can you talk a little more about how skill knowledge ramps will work? For example, if I'm learning a crafting skill and fail while making something that I'm trying to learn, do I gain crafting skill or crafting knowledge, or both? What if I succeed in making something that I'm trying to learn or make? So there's a couple things to point out there, and I'll let Snipe cover it mostly, but I wanted to emphasize that you are correct. That hasn't changed. Making nails allows you to get better at making nails. It's good at allowing you to provide some form of income, to play a role in the economy, but it doesn't inherently make you better at making swords. Yeah. That being said, the areas where it will improve is on the techniques, because remember, we have knowledge and we have techniques, and so knowledge is very specific. I'm not sure how specialized the knowledge will be, but really knowledge is how we differentiate one thing from another, like knowledge of how to make a nail versus knowledge of how to make a sword. But the techniques you use might be similar. You might actually find that there's an overlap, and that overlap of skills, or those overlaps of techniques, is really what makes you better at that skill. So metalworking, for example, as a skill, is really just a set of techniques. Some of those techniques are used to make swords, some of those techniques are used to make nails, and some are used in both. And for the ones that work in both, then in that case, making nails, while it will not make you better at will not make you better at knowing how to make swords, might make you better at making swords because you're getting better at the technique.
It will certainly make the crafting experience a little bit easier for you, because the same techniques are going to be applied the same ways. They'll just be applied to different objects. So if you're good at that technique, you'll be good at that technique as applied to the blade instead of the nail. But that said, building nails all your life is never going to let you build a sword, because you also need the knowledge of how to make a sword for that to be useful.
Right.
So it's more like you gain a benefit from related skills and practices, but that benefit only goes so far as modulated by knowledge.
They said, so skills is equal to techniques, backed by your knowledge of relevant subjects. That sounds right. Yeah. Techniques backed by your knowledge.
Yeah, that's pretty true.
A good way to look at it is skills are a collection of techniques, but you use that collection of techniques in combination with the knowledge in order to do something with those skills. So, whether it's a crafting skill or a combat skill, you need both the knowledge as well as the technique. And that's how we balance this idea of player skill versus character skill. And right now, there are some things that are just knowledge. We talked about that before. Some of the things that were in the bardic tree before, we have now lumped into knowledge, like the pharmacology and kind of medicine related knowledge of herbology, like this herb does this. I know that because I've researched it through one way or another, or I've discovered it through observation. That's the knowledge component. There are other things, though, that are entirely character skill based, and there isn't necessarily any knowledge associated with that. Though there is this kind of concept of like memory, muscle memory,
Right.
which is like the styles and stances. And then there's yet some things that might not be either. And the example I always go back to is things like archery or chopping down a tree. Chopping down a tree, certainly there is a technique to it. But whether or not we want to allow the players to develop different techniques for chopping down a tree, or whether or not that's, focusing on the nuances rather than enjoying the gameplay. But that being said, chopping down a tree the wrong way could make it fall the wrong direction. And so you still might need to know as a player when it's time to change where you're chopping and things like that. Similar, archery, while we could introduce techniques and we could introduce, different skills and knowledge and things like that, it's much more enjoyable just to read the environment, read the scenario, look at the wind, read the tooling that you have. That's a fun process, and it's entirely player driven. And so there are some things, like I said, that we're leaning more heavily on player skill, and there are some things that we lean heavily on character knowledge. But it's never really character skill at this point. It's player knowledge, character skill, and then the skill system and techniques is kind of the marriage between those two.
Right, the interface, if you will. Yeah.
All right. Huntsmaster also asked, let's assume that the primary attribute contribution to a skill is greater than the secondary attribute contribution. I think by definition, primary and secondary, that would be true, which is greater than the tertiary attribute contribution. What is the baseline ratio for primary, secondary, tertiary attributes on skill? 100%, 50%, 25%. Put another way, are the contributions of the non-primary stats sufficient that a baseline untrained Genoa can equal a baseline untrained Kipik with a sling, or is the Genoa's lower mental primary stat a significant handicap? Basically, it's people wanting to know, like,
Genoa's stupid. That's
I think that it's safe to assume that it's going to be varied. I don't know that we have a strict system of the secondary is always 50% as effective or contributes 50% as much as the primary, and then the tertiary is always 50% as much. I think when you look objectively at different types of activities, it's obvious that some techniques or some skills require 50-50. We have primary, secondary, tertiary to identify that more than one thing contributes to it. I don't know that everything will even have a tertiary.
Right. I was actually going to say, in some cases, even though we, in the data, there's always a primary, secondary, tertiary slot. In some cases, the primary and the secondary can be the same attribute, and then the tertiary can be like,
right.
We play with these numbers as the skill is, calls for it. So as far as ratios go, I would say some, not as much, and less than that.
That's fair. That's like, that reminds me of when I was learning computer science, there was like the definition of an integer and a short integer and stuff like that. And like the C language never actually defined the size of them. It was always like a short integer is less than an integer. Like, that's it. Less than or equal to an integer. And you're always like, well, that's super helpful. All right. Leva asks, let's see, we're about 5 questions from the end. I think we'll try and finish this page and then we'll call it a day. So Leva asks, seeing as dance is a skill, will dance then be constructed like construction of music, where you can create different dances, putting different steps together, or will it be a fixed animation? If yes, there will be any way of sharing the dance like a sheet of music prior to balls or parties.
Interesting. So we are not implementing an interpretive dance system that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
That said, our intention was always to have a variety of dance styles, and they were meant to be you and a partner in some cases, or you alone in other cases. And so what the dance skill kind of is the skill that allows us to build a sort of game framework around dancing. And I'm going to be candid, we have not implemented it yet. So
yeah. There's
only so much that I can tell you here. That said, we weren't planning to, you can't make the Urkel dance yourself.
No.
It would have to be an existing dance.
I think the combat system is probably the closest parallel with the different different styles and different techniques. So you would have potentially the ability, and I'll be forthcoming too. There's a lot of skills in this game, many of which we develop frameworks for and then we dive into deeply. But given that we still have time left in development, I mean, some of these skill systems we plan on implementing later on in the process, prioritizing some over others, and we simply have not spent a lot of time on the details for dance yet. If I had to guess, though, which I'm not guessing, but I would assume that it's similar to the way we handle a combination between music and combat. So, you would learn different styles, which has different moves and things like that, and then you'd be able to choose the correct time in which to sequence those to make it an interesting dance. But it is not something we have dove into great detail yet, but it is something that we want, because we do feel like that's a part of the game that adds a cool, interesting dynamic for like the balls and dances of dynasties and that kind of meta game. So it's something it's slated. It's something we're going to work on, but it's not something we've dove into much yet. Victoria Rachel says, why do parent skills have attributes, and how does that affect their child skills? For example, thrown weapons use strength, focus, and intuition, but if you're throwing a blade, do you use agility too, or instead of intuition?
I can answer that one actually really simply. Most of the parent skills have attributes just in case, right? So we realize that there are going to be some applications of skills that maybe don't directly match our current end leaves, and so we wanted to give ourselves room to allow these executions without necessarily adding a whole other end leaf to that group. So to do that, mechanically, we needed to be able to have attribute assignments to these parents so that they would be ready if we needed to use them that way. We are not actually using them that way at the moment. It's there just in case.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stuff is going to shake out too by the end of 040, because a lot of those parent level things, we may even at some point ditch those abilities at the parent levels, because once we solidify what the children are and all that sort of stuff, then the necessity for those and the guidelines may fall out. On the other hand, we may find that there are just techniques that don't fit well into any of the children, and so in the absence of, or in the interest of not creating additional skills that have just a single technique, we might just put those in the parent, and in which case, we'll have to find a good way to represent that. But,
right.
Poingfast says, at this point in skill development, do unrelated skills detract from one another?
Not directly, though, as I mentioned earlier about the way skill growth and decay kind of works, if you pull yourself too far apart and, spread out on both ends of the flower, you could find that working on these, wow, that's weird. Anyway, working on these skills might make these skills decay, etc. I don't know what I'm grabbing.
I don't know, but there was you got to be careful, because this community will snag any video you give them. I remember particularly a couple years ago, we were doing a Q&A with DM21 Gaming, Bicycle Walrus, and he made the observation that you could turn different dials. And so he reached out and turned different dials. And as soon as he did that, he pulled his hands back. He's like, oh no. And it was absolutely a GIF within like 30 seconds. And it was one of the funny ones too. So I've always been very cautious since then to turn the dials. Anyways, all right. Infernus asks, you guys stated dual wielding and other new skill branches. I must know, can I make my character left-handed instead of being forced into another right-handed world? So there's a couple things there. The design of handedness has changed back and forth over time. Initially, we didn't have the concept of handedness. You didn't have a left hand or right handed. However, you could put things in your left hand or right hand, which hasn't changed. We still have that ability. But it would also change the symmetry of your techniques. So if you were doing combat techniques and you swapped hands, then now it would look different. So the attack would come from a different direction and things like that. So if you were blocking previously, then now you need to block from a different direction or parry from a different direction. I don't know how much that's changed. I think that's still the plan. However, this idea that you are better with one hand than you are with the other hand, and so as a result of that, your techniques are stronger with one hand than they are with the other, isn't something we really have. So, if we have the concept of handedness and allow you to do techniques with either hand and update the symmetry as a result of that, I don't think your character is ever going to favor one or the other. But it does tie into the UI UX, because, typically with our system, left hand is left mouse, right hand is right mouse. And so that's just going to mean that you're using a different mouse button more than anything.
Right.
So I think as a result of that, a lot of people are going to naturally be right-handed because they prefer to use their right mouse button, but you can swap that in the UI potentially. So I think the point I'm getting at is that I don't think Elyria is really a handed world. I think they're ambidextrous by nature. Luminios asks, do all skills have a primary, secondary, and tertiary attribute linked to them? If so, is the relative importance of primary, secondary, and tertiary attribute the same for every level?
We already answered that.
Asked and answered. All right, final question for today, guys. This comes to us from Lethality. He says, the skill flower depicts 2 to 4 tiers in the hierarchy of each petal. Where would techniques fit in, or would all skills potentially have any number of techniques of their own?
More the latter. All skills can potentially have any number of techniques of their own.
And even the parent level techniques the parent level pedals at this point can have techniques in them.
Yeah, that could change.
I don't know that that's the end goal, but at this point, we have a set of techniques that we're working with, and we're trying to figure out the best leaf node to put them in, the best pedal, and that's where a lot of the work in 040 is coming from, is balancing this tree and making sure that each branch of the tree or the flower has been given enough attention to detail that people would want to investigate that and learn how to do that and become a master of that, while at the same time, making sure that we don't have so many of them that the game starts to become a burden. It should still be fun. It should still be something where quick play allows for quick adaptation and quick understanding, whereas the things that people want to spend time and energy and thought on require that time and energy. Like if the game of checkers took years and years to learn the rules for, nobody would play it.
Yep.
Because the reward for playing it is relatively low. Whereas a game like chess, it's more complicated, both because it takes longer to learn and vice versa. It takes longer to learn because it's more complicated. But there should always be synergy there. And if you have a game that's very easy to learn, but that's not easy to learn, but doesn't really provide much reward, then people will optimize out of it. They just won't do it. And so really it's about balancing the skill tree and skill flower type stuff. For us is about identifying which parts of the game feel like they need skills, and that adds value, which parts do not need skills and are fine with just knowledge, and which parts don't require either, and they're just something that we give power to the players. For example, jumping. Like most games in history, from going back to the early platformers on the consoles, allow you to just jump. There isn't a jump skill. There are in a lot of tabletop games, though.
That's true, yeah.
Tabletop games, you need to be able to have a certain jump skill, and it's functions based on your strength and things like that. So, we have to make a decision, is jump a skill? And for us, part of the mechanics we want is to feel like a high action, high adventure game, and so jumping isn't something that we really want it to be a skill, at least not a character skill. We want that to be a player thing.
Right.
And so there's going to be a lot of things like that we cut, in the sense that there isn't a skill or a knowledge associated with it, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it becomes part of the player's experience and not part of the skill system. Anything you want to sign off with? Anything you want to add to today's Q&A?
No, I think that's about it. I do notice the chat, though. They're asking questions about this here.
Yeah. So we periodically add to our armory. Serpentius, our esteemed lead community support guy, found this recently, and he decided to add it to our armory. So it's there for concept. It's there for us to incorporate into our designs. We actually already had a weapon very similar to this. I believe it was either with the Weird or the Turesk. I don't remember which, but we've got a couple of these.
I think it's the Weird.
Is it the Weird? Yeah. So we've got a couple of. Oh yeah, actually, it would almost have to be, because the whole point is that they're in close proximity in caves and things like that. Yeah, this is there for our entertainment. It's a prop, but it is fun. I have not
cool.
checked to see whether or not it's sharp or not. Many of the other things we have.
It is not.
It's not. It's a replica. Okay. We do have several others in here that are actually sharp. So it's always good to know before you go picking it up and playing with it. All right. Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay, guys. Thank you again for joining us on another live Q&A. We hope you enjoy the opportunity to interact with us and learn more about the game that we're making, where we are in development, the work that we're doing, and just kind of get to know us as a development studio. We will be doing these regularly, like we've done in the past. I think we've got a next one coming up. Our goal is to try and do them like every 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks. So I expect the next one, since we're in the end of July, probably we won't have one in August. We've got a lot of stuff going on in August with the Searing Plague event and other work that we're doing on 040. So I expect the next one to come out probably sometime in September. So keep an eye out on the forums. Make sure, if you haven't already, join our official Discord. If you're watching this on Twitch, or if you're watching our video afterwards on YouTube, we do have our official Discord channel and server, which is discord.gg/Chronicles of Elyria. Make sure you come in there and join, interact with our community. We do have, I would say, by far the most welcoming and inviting community of any game I've ever met. So, you guys are obviously more than welcome to come in and talk to the community, to learn more about the game. Do come on our forums on chroniclesofelyria.com, and we should see another one of these in September or so. And that's all I got from us here at Soulbound Studios. We'll see you next time.